Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Today's episode of Beyond the Fence Line comes to you from Texas Wildlife Association headquarters in New Braunfels, Texas. TWA has been an essential partner in the success of Texas Agricultural Land Trust since its inception. TALT is very proud of the partnership with Texas Wildlife Association and thankful for their support over the years. Welcome to Beyond the Fence Line. My name is James Oliver. I currently serve as the Director of Engagement for Texas Agricultural Land Trust, and I am your host for today's podcast. We're going to be talking about a subject that most of you listeners know all too well: the increase in rural land values and the pressure to divide and sell. Joining us today is Kelly Langdon. Kelly currently serves on the TALT board, and his family has very recently donated an easement on their Fall Creek Ranch near Granbury, North Texas. Kelly, welcome.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me in today, and looking forward to visiting with you about different issues and being part of this podcast.
Your family has been on the same land for 4 generations, dating back to 1882. That's quite a legacy. Can you tell us a little bit about your family land?
Yeah, sure. So basically, Mom and Dad first started out, they were married and they lived in Clarendon, Texas in the Panhandle for a few years before they moved to Granbury. I was born in 1983, and I grew up on the ranch on Fall Creek Ranch and have been there ever since, and have worked for them, even work for them currently today. My dad's uncle, Jack Langdon, had bought the ranch, and I'm not sure the exact date. I think it was back in probably the late 50s, something like that. And he had the ranch, and he knew that my dad would be interested in running the ranch and living out there. And so the original ranch was about 600 acres, I believe. And Mom and Dad were living on the ranch, running cattle, and basically making land payments to Uncle Jack. And it got to be Uncle Jack got kind of ill, and it was kind of close to his death, and it just happened to be my dad's 40th birthday. And for my dad's 40th birthday, Jack forgave the rest of the note that my parents owed on the rest of the land of the original 600 acres. And from then on, it was when I was growing up, my brother and I and Mom and Dad were the only ones that lived out there on the ranch. It was always a struggle. Mom and Dad instilled hard work in us, and Mom boarded horses and we ran cattle, and it just seemed like Mom and Dad, I was just a young kid, so I didn't really understand all the economics behind it. But nowadays, when I've had conversations with Mom and Dad, I realize the amount of work and sweat and tears that they put into the place of getting it what it is today. They started out with the original 600 acres, and then throughout the years, they were able to add 100 acres here, 200 acres here, and it was just, they were always making land payments, and so we didn't have a lot of extra disposable income. We didn't go on family vacations like most people did. Everything always went back into that ranch, trying to build it up as much as we could. Basically, today now it's about 1,280 acres, and we're still to this day trying to figure out. There's not a lot of land left that you can add to it, but there's a couple different places that are 100 acres here or 70 acres here that we're trying to figure out how to buy it. And it's a lot harder to do it today because of land values than it was, 30 years ago.
You made an interesting comment that even though you're still trying to add to the ranch today, there's just not much left to add to it. There's some land trend data that comes from Texas A&M's Natural Resource Institute. And this is kind of based over on the I-35 corridor. But on average, working lands have experienced a 24% increase in land value since 2012. and a 291% increase over a 20-year period. I would have to think that these same pressures like you're talking about have removed some of that opportunity to add to that ranch. Just in terms of right there around where you are today, what have you guys seen in the past 12 years in terms of values and uses of the land close to you?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. There's some data that came out a few years ago. It was talking the Fall Creek Ranch is in Granbury, and Granbury's in Hood County. And most of our ranch is in Hood County, but part of it's across the county line in Johnson County. But it surprised us, but it really didn't surprise us. One day we were watching the news, and it talked about, this was probably, I don't know, eight years ago maybe, and we saw on the news that Hood County was the 8th fastest growing county in the nation. And we were just dumbfounded. We said, how could our little small town Granbury be that? And, there were a few other counties. There's one in Florida, and I can't remember the other counties that were ahead of us. But it just goes back to, right now there's 1,200 families moving to Texas every day, and we're losing about 1,000 acres every day to developers, and turning farm and ranch land into neighborhoods and houses. And for me, unfortunately, I've seen that firsthand in Granbury. It's hit home more than some people out in South Texas or West Texas or something like that. But in Granbury, I remember going to high school in Granbury, and you drive through town, and I think there was one stoplight going through town, and you could get from our ranch you could get to the other side of Granbury to the high school. When I drive to high school, I could get there in probably 15 minutes. And nowadays, you're going to be lucky if you can do it in 45 minutes. That's if you hit all the lights the right way and traffic's not too bad, but it can probably take you over an hour pretty easily. But going back to the question of being able to buy additional land and that kind of stuff, there's just not a lot of land left that you could actually buy to add to a ranch. It's been, there's shopping malls built on it, or restaurants built on it, or subdivisions built on it. And it's kind of crazy if you look at the data on Granbury. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but you pull it up and you look at the city of Granbury population. And I remember when I was in high school, I would drive by the city of Granbury sign, and it had the population. It was 5,003 or something like that. And that number was very skewed because, there's 5,000 people living in the city limits of Granbury, but all around Granbury are these housing subdivisions. And I'll give you, for example, Pecan Plantation is in the city, or considered Granbury. There's more people that live in the one housing subdivision of Pecan Plantation than the whole city of Granbury. And you have multiple, you've got Pecan Plantation, De Cordova, Rolling Hills Ranch is a new one, and there's a place just north of us called the Petite Hill Ranch, and it used to belong to the Petite family, and they've just recently started subdividing it and building houses out there. And there's just it makes it hard to add any land to a ranch, and not only just because the land is not available anymore because it's housing, but that many people moving in and the developers developing it have made the land values just skyrocket over the last, I would say probably the last 15 years probably.
So that 70 and 80 acre tract that you're talking about, what would current values be? Undeveloped?
Yep, undeveloped, with just being in ranch land. I'm guessing, on a tract, what I would say that small, 70 acres, you're probably going to be looking at $20,000 plus an acre to be able to buy a 70 acre tract, which makes it very difficult. 15, 20 years ago, you might have been able to buy that for $1,000, $1,500, maybe $2,000 an acre, and now you're looking at $20,000 an acre. It's really hard to come up with that kind of change to, add an additional 70 acres. When you look at the value of that 70 acres, you think, gosh, 20 years ago, I could have bought and added 500 acres to the place for what 70.
Or today I could sell out and the family could retire.
Right, yeah.
And so, obviously your parents have spent the vast majority of their married lives putting this place together. What have they done? And you talked about your mother running a boarding facility and y'all ran cows, but what other activities have you done to try to fend off this pricing pressure to hold on to the ranch?
Well, so with a place that's about, like I said, our ranch is about 1,300 acres, and that's big enough not to be a hobby farm, but it's not big enough to be like some of these ranches that are 10,000 acres or 20,000 acres or plus that where you can run enough cattle to support a family. On 1,300 acres, on our 1,300 acres, we run about 40 to 50 mama cows on it. And, we could run more than that on it, but we have a big emphasis, and I do, and I have a special place in my heart. My mom has a special place in her heart for the wildlife that live on the ranch. Wildlife don't have a voice. They don't get to raise their hand and say, hey, I need help. My home's being destroyed, or somebody's moving in and building a house and I'm losing my house. It was important to us to give that voice to the wildlife and to run a conservative number of head of cattle to keep the place in an ag exemption and to continue to run a ranching legacy on it and have cattle, but not so many cattle to the point where you ruin the habitat for the wildlife. Yeah, you could probably run 200 head of cattle or 250 head of cattle on 1,300 acres, but there wouldn't be any grass or anything left for some of these wildlife species to live. And to me, that's just as important as the ranching aspect of owning and managing land. And so you start thinking about, okay, so you want to keep something here for wildlife. You want to keep running cattle on it. My mom and dad still live on the ranch and run the ranch. I help them full time. You start trying to figure out, hey, you've got to pay a salary to Kelly to help. And then we, Joe and Karen, still have to make a living to live off the ranch. Well, 40 or 50 head of cattle is not enough. It's not enough barely for one family to survive, much less two families to survive. And so that's where we came up with that's when mom and dad were boarding horses for the public for a while. That's something else that you can do with the ranch that doesn't really hurt the ranch too bad. And then, my wife and I recently built kind of a wedding venue type deal, and it works great. It's a way that we're able to share the ranch with other people. Our average wedding that comes out, we do about 15 to 20 weddings a year, and my wife and I run them all. And so for us, it's almost a full-time job on top of a full-time job that I'm doing ranching for mom and dad. But, when somebody comes out and wants to do a wedding, it's always on a Saturday. So they come out and do a rehearsal the Friday before. And so I'm tied up on Friday. I'm down there the whole day, Saturday, helping them. And then we clean it up on Sunday, getting it ready to do again in case we have another one the following weekend. But you have to be able to do certain businesses like that to create an income to where you can continue to work on the ranch and keep the ranch together.
So you were talking about the importance of wildlife to your mother and to yourself. Are y'all generating any income from the wildlife at this point?
So not necessarily. Part of the ranch is high fenced. Our neighbors put up a high fence on part of their ranch, and it made sense for us to high fence part of ours. And so I am now starting to run. I haven't sold any deer hunts or anything like that, but I've stocked it with trophy whitetail that will be ready to be harvested. When they get to be 5-6 years old, we'll start harvesting some of these deer. And one deer has a whole lot less impact on ranch land than one cow does. And that was my thoughts or my aspects from it is, yeah, you can run cows on it and you don't have to deal with the public. You take your calf crop, you take it to the livestock sale and sell them. But the return on investment, or the return on, I don't know how you would say it, on the use of the land, if I can turn around and sell a whitetail hunt and sell that for $8,000 for a trophy hunt, that takes 8 calves to sell what I could sell one deer hunt for. But you have to deal with the public and that kind of stuff. But to me, that makes more sense being able to sell a deer hunt than it does put 8 more mouths to feed of the cattle line.
In that close to population, any ecotourism, birding, any of those things? Are y'all doing any of that right now?
So ecotourism is kind of an odd question, because even when we do weddings, our wedding event venue is basically in the heart of the ranch. I mean, you've been there, James, and you've seen it. It's got Fall Creek that runs right through it, and a waterfall that goes through it where the ranch gets its name. And so our venue is a little bit different than your typical wedding venue that, there's a million, a lot of people have started up wedding venues, and you can go, there's a million of them in DFW. But I would venture to say that there's not one that is similar to ours. There's
very unique.
Yep. And, when you talk about ecotourism, when somebody comes and takes a tour of our venue, I think that's what attracts them to our venue, is saying, hey, I'm out here in the middle of a 1,300 acre ranch. There's wildlife around. We have a coastal field that's right behind the venue. Sometimes there's cattle grazing in there, depending on what time of year. And it gives you that sense of ecotourism being there. And then, in return, when they have all their guests that come out for their wedding, those people get to experience that same ecotourism. One of the very first weddings that we did is there was a couple that the bride's mom and dad lived in this same subdivision, Pecan Plantation, that I mentioned earlier. And their daughter was stationed at a military base in New Jersey, as well as her future husband, her fiance. And so the daughter was busy, so she left it up to her mom and dad to find a wedding venue. So they came and took a tour here. And I would say probably 80 to 90% of the people and that was probably 150 people there. And I bet 90% of the people were from New Jersey that came out of state, came to Texas. And I'll tell you what, they loved it. They just ate it up. I mean, the cows were in the background. They were more interested in getting selfies with some Texas cattle behind them than they were taking pictures of the bride and groom that were there, I think. But, so as far as ecotourism, the wedding kind of ties into that. But, from a whole different business of just having people out to come take bird watching and that kind of stuff, we've never gotten into that. Just about every couple that comes out, we have a house on the creek there that the brides kind of get ready in and do their hair and makeup. And every time they come out, everybody always asks, hey, do y'all rent this out on the weekend? Or, we live in DFW. We'd love to get out of the city and bring our family, our kids out here and camp out for the weekend and hike around. And, we've just never, dove into that yet. It's something that we may in the future sometime. There's definitely a market for it. But I'm not sure I'm ready to open that can of worms.
I was going to say, that's just what you need, is another job.
Yeah, exactly.
Kelly, it was a very big honor for me to get to sit and visit with your parents as they started down through this process. And I know how incredibly important it was to them to transfer this to the next generation in one piece. Do you mind describing how those discussions played out within the family as you started it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked earlier about, the sweat and tears that mom and dad, basically for their entire working career, put this ranch together. And I was fortunate to grow up on the ranch and see the hard work and still work for them now. And they were not concerned, I don't think, so much with my brother and I about us selling the ranch, but they were concerned, maybe grandkids or future grandkids or great grandkids, whoever, that's a typical problem for family ranches, is that, somebody had the ranch, they leave it to the next generation. They may or may not sell it then or subdivide it, but eventually down the line, somebody subdivides it. And the ranch ends up going from one big piece to maybe two pieces, or maybe one big piece to three smaller pieces. But, that's the problem with land fragmentation and somebody trying to leave a ranch to their heirs. And you can see it not only in Texas, but across the United States. basically what mom and dad came up with and what I came up with them in discussing this is we kind of said, doing a conservation easement with TALT will protect the land. I said, it might, 100 years from now or 500 years from now, the Langdons might not own it anymore, but at least we know that this 1,280 acres is still going to be one big chunk of land, and it's not going to be cut up. There's not going to be a shopping center on it. There's not going to be 1,000 homes put on it. It's still going to be a working Texas cattle ranch, whether the Langdon family owns it or somewhere down the line the Langdon heirs decide to sell it. Then the ranch still has to go, whoever, they can sell it, and whoever buys it still has to abide by the conservation easement that is held with TALT on it. And, that just gave mom and dad a peace of mind knowing that everything that they worked so hard their whole lives to put together would stay intact forever.
What does it mean to you to know that the ranch your parents have worked their lives to put together, the ranch that you're raising your children on, is going to be protected forever? What does it mean to Kelly?
Yeah, it kind of a odd deal. I was raised on the ranch, and so I'm almost in the exact same boat as what my mom and dad were. A lot of the times the parents own it, the kid leaves the nest, flies the coop, and lives in town somewhere, and doesn't have any interest in the ranch until it's time to sell the ranch one day, and then they're interested in the money. And for me, it's not about that at all. It's I could care less if the ranch is worth $100 million or if it's worth $10. It's not in my mindset to sell it. I mean, if I sold it, what I would do with the money is I'd be looking for the exact same thing. I'd be looking for the same ranch to reinvest it in. So I mean, it's pointless to sell it. And so I just sleep easy knowing that mom and dad were able to, luckily find the organization that could help them put this ranch into this easement and forever protect it. Let me tell you, part of the reason you have land fragmentation is because a mom and dad or some parents own a piece of property that's worth a lot of money. And when they decide to leave it to their heirs, whoever the beneficiary of that receives that property, or in this case a ranch, has to pay, if it's over a certain amount, have to pay back to the government an estate tax. And that, depending on who's in office and who the current administration is, that estate tax limitation varies. I know when we first started looking at conservation easements, I think it was around $5 million that my mom could leave tax free and that my dad could leave tax free. Now it's up to I think around $13 million that each one of them can leave tax free. But there's some talk that it may go back down to $5 million or maybe even $1 million or something like that. So when you have a big piece of property that you're trying to leave to somebody and you leave it to them, and the heirs have to try to figure out a way to pay for it, there's no way that, if mom and dad left me this ranch and then I owed a $2 or $3 million estate tax on it, there's no way I would be able to come up with that money without cutting the ranch up and selling part of it, aka land fragmentation, to be able to keep the other part of it. And that's one thing that a conservation easement has done to help us is, I'll just make figures easy, but say you've got this ranch, say you've got a 1,000-acre ranch that's worth, $10 million, and you put a conservation easement on it, and the conservation easement values change or depend on where the ranch is and how susceptible it is to being developed and cut up. But say you have a $10 million ranch and you put an easement on it and the easement's worth 30%, so you have a $3 million easement, that just made your ranch on paper worth $7 million instead of $10 million. So those things like that can help leave it to somebody and help get the value of the property down to be able to leave it estate tax free. And even right now, the conservation easement helped us do the conservation easement helped us do that, but we're even looking right now at putting it into a trust or putting it into a LLC or a limited family partnership. Anything that we can do to get the value of that ranch down to where they can leave it to my brother and I without us having to sell part of it to keep the rest of it is the main goal.
How big a factor was that estate tax treatment of the conservation easement? How big a factor was that in the decision to place the ranch in a conservation easement?
For us, it wasn't a big factor. That I'm sure for some people it would be. I know I've talked with Mom and Dad, and we would put this ranch into a conservation easement without any of the tax incentives. But that's just who we are, and that's how important this ranch is to us to keep together. That whether or not it made it reduce it in value or not, we would have still done this just to protect the ranch.
So the board of Texas Agricultural Land Trust is made up of members of Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers, Texas Farm Bureau, and our partners here today, Texas Wildlife Association. And then there's a few at-large spots. But over the years, as the organization has added more easements, we've felt like it's critically important that we have those easement donors serve on our board. And so you've recently come on to the board at TALT. Talk about that experience a little bit, please, sir.
Yeah, so, I had no idea. I mean, I knew what TALT was, but I had no idea that Chad Ellis was going to ask me to be on the board. He, Mom and Dad, we finished putting the easement in, and then I got a call one day from Chad saying, "Hey, Kelly, would you be interested in being on the board of directors for TALT?" And for me, that was a great honor to be able to even be acknowledged and to be asked. And so I readily accepted. But, from a conservation easement holder, our practices on the ranch, we have made no changes of the way we operate our ranch before easement versus after easement. I mean, the only thing that changed for us was the protection, knowing that in the future the ranch isn't going to be cut up. But I mean, we still run cattle on the ranch. We still build fences where we need to build fences. We still, if we need to do whatever, any of the ranch activities that we normally do. I mean, we're not hindered or handcuffed or anything by any means of by placing the easement on it.
Now that you've been through the complete process, what advice would you give others that are thinking about going down this path?
That's a great question or a great comment. So I'm currently working with some other ranch owners that are next to us. There's a guy that owns about another 1,400 acres that he doesn't butt up to us, but there's just one small parcel of land in between us. Had meetings with him and his estate planner and lawyers, and I think that he's going to move forward with putting his ranch into a conservation easement with TALT, and I think it just gave him the confidence knowing that, hey, in Hood County, there was nobody that had put a conservation easement, and nobody, when you're doing, this is a huge decision that you're doing, and nobody wants to be the guinea pig to be the very first one that's going to do it. And so Mom and Dad and I were the ones that kind of said, hey, let's do this. And I think it's given people kind of a peace of mind, or they can call us and ask questions. Hey, was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Would you have done something different? And up to this point, I mean, it was a great decision. I mean, James, when you and Chad came in and talked to us about doing an easement, I mean, for us it was a no-brainer. I mean, I'll back up for a little bit. So several years before we ever put a conservation easement on the place, Mom was always kicking the idea around, hey, I think this is something that we want to do or that we should do. And my dad was the typical stereotype that, oh, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to sign it over to the federal government. And, he had the mindset that, hey, we're going to do this. And then some guy's going to drive out in a black Mercedes with a suit and tie and be telling me what I can do and what I can't do on the ranch. And that's the mindset that he had. And unfortunately, that's a lot of the mindset or the perception that people have had around conservation easements. And I think Talt is starting to break that trend and, show people that that's not the case at all. I mean, the Talt board is made up of farmers and ranchers. And, they come out and do a monitor, but we hop in the truck with Hannah Blankenship and drive around, and she says, okay, have we built any new skyscrapers out here, anything that I need to know about? And I said, no, we can drive around and check things out, and it's a real laid-back, easy peasy type deal. And, just being on the board, I think, has helped other people realize that, and I can talk to other landowners around us, and it just gives them that vote of confidence to say, hey, maybe this is something, I've been kicking this idea around too, and maybe it's something that I needed to do. But, we going back to my dad's views on it and my mom, and, she had talked about, hey, maybe we should do this, maybe we shouldn't. And I mean, it went on for years of maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I said, you know what, Mom, why don't you just make a phone call and see if we even qualify? I mean, we've got some oil and gas on the place where they've done some drilling, and we've got some pad sites. I said, we may not even qualify. I don't know anything about conservation easements, but you ought to call and just get them out here to come look at the piece of property, see if they would. And when Chad and at the time Jacqueline Roberts was with us, and James came out, and I mean, it was like sitting down with family, to be completely honest. And it just made the decision super easy to move forward and say, yep, this is exactly what we need to do.
Was the actual process more difficult than you thought? Was it easier than you thought?
I can't speak. I'm not the one that does all the paperwork and has to sit down at the. Unfortunately, I think one day I will be, but that'd be a great question to ask Karen Langdon, my mom.
Yes.
But she's the one that has to sit down and file the paperwork and answer the emails and that kind of stuff. And it was a lengthy process, but obviously it wasn't too bad. I've talked to other landowners around, and personally, what I've found is people that live on the land, grew up on the ranch, or maybe still living on the ranch, seem like they're the ones that are more interested in putting a conservation easement on the place to protect it versus somebody that owns a ranch and doesn't even live on. Maybe they live in the city and use it as a weekend type place. They don't seem as interested in doing conservation easements. But I've come across a lot of landowners that might have 150 acres, or they might have 200 acres, or maybe 400 acres, or whatever. But they might not have they might be living on the land, barely scratching by. They love the land. They don't want it broken up. They'd love to be able to put a conservation easement on it, but they don't have the funds to do the transaction costs that it takes to pay the legal fees and that kind of stuff to put a conservation easement on it. Is there a way that Talt can help with any of that?
For the last several years, Talt has worked very, very hard to try to establish funds and find funders that would contribute to the transaction costs. We know these things cost more than just time. There is a monetary cost involved. And what we have found is these funders, and it's particularly when you're putting together other conservation easements around one you already have in place, for example, yours, are very, very interested in funding those transaction costs. It provides a lot of leverage for their dollars. If we use some of the numbers you talked about earlier, $20,000 an acre for 200 acres is $4 million. And if they put in, say $50,000 towards the transaction cost, that's highly leveraging those dollars. And so we're finding some people out there and some funding sources that really look forward to those opportunities. Kelly, thank you for your time today. We really do appreciate it, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us. Before we go, though, there is going to be a full feature film on the Langdon family and their legacy coming out later this summer. We don't have the exact date yet, but it's coming this summer. And always know that Talt staff is available to answer any questions that landowners might have to see if a conservation easement is a good tool for them. As always, thank you for listening to Beyond the Fence Line. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and SoundCloud.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.